Today is Tuesday, June 11th, 2013, and this is Stephen Fagin, the Associate Curator at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. And the interview that we're doing today is part of the museum's ongoing oral history project. And today it's my great pleasure to be here with Mark Troy. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to the museum today and share your story with us.
Glad to be here, glad to help. It's a worthy project.
At the beginning of these, sir, we always ask our guests to start off by giving us their full name, date and place of birth, and just a little background about themselves.
Okay, my full name is Mark Anthony Troy, Jr. I was born in Seattle, Washington, 9/11. What is that? 9 September 27th of 37. And I was one of 7 children. My father was in the retail business. We traveled all over the country, lived in about 9 states. Ended up moving to Dallas when I was a senior in high school, where I finished at Jesuit High School. Then I went to SMU, undergraduate in law school, and I graduated from law school in 1962 when I went to work for Henry Wade as Assistant District Attorney that year. Is that enough preliminary?
Yeah, that's fine. Well, that'll get us right to where we need to be. Let's talk a little bit about that time period, the early 1960s, while you were a student at SMU. Of course, that's when John F. Kennedy became president. Do you have any particular memories of John F. Kennedy? Were you a supporter?
I was a supporter of John Kennedy. I was very excited about him. He was the new face, the new ideas. I was very enthused about John Kennedy. I thought he was going to be one of our great presidents. And I think during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he proved he was.
How would you describe the political atmosphere in Dallas at that time in the early 60s?
It was very conservative and very right-wing. We had the John Birch Society, which was very strong in Dallas at the time. They're very right-wing and very extreme. And when Kennedy got elected, the right-wing in Dallas and the John Birch Society did not appreciate it at all. They were against him. Even after he was elected, they were against him. And they also were sort of anti-Catholic, and they let that be known. So the atmosphere in Dallas was majority conservative, and of course did not vote for Kennedy, the majority. But the younger people and the more liberal-thinking people thought Kennedy was the answer to a lot of problems we had in the United States, especially with the Soviet Union. He'd be able to reach an accommodation, and so he was the inspiration for a lot of people that things were going to change for the better. Because at that time the Cold War was very hot, and there was a lot of danger of war between Russia and the United States. And we thought Kennedy could breach the divide with the Soviet Union and get us some sort of disarmament. And that was the hope of the young people at the time.
How hard was it for you to get a job right out of college at the Dallas District Attorney's Office?
It was very hard at the time. There would be like 500 applications for every opening at the Assistant District Attorney. And I found out through contacts I had in Dallas, talking to civil attorneys, that the only way you could get a job with Henry Wade with 500 applications was twofold. You had to, first of all, get a letter from a friend or a political backer of his recommending you. Secondly, he liked people that are persistent, so you would have to show up in his office waiting room every 3 or 4 weeks and ask if there's any openings yet. You haven't forgot my resume. And so I was instructed by 3 or 4 prominent civil lawyers. One that was a roommate of Henry Wade at UT Law School, Mr. Tom Eunice, who was on the Dallas City Council, one of the most prominent attorneys, and he wrote the letter for me to Mr. Wade, which I think was instrumental in me getting the job. But it was very difficult to get a job, assistant district attorney, and like I said, there was 500 applications for every opening, and you couldn't get a job till somebody left or got fired.
How many assistant DAs were there at that time?
As I recall, there was maybe 50, 75, no more than 100. I don't think there was that many. About 75, my guess, whereas now there's 300 or 400. And I think 75 would be my best recollection.
Would all of them report directly to Henry Wade, or were there managers who controlled small numbers?
No, there were supervisors over various sections. But since it wasn't a huge DA's office, you would report to either Henry Wade or his first assistant, Bill Alexander. And but Henry Wade would come around every afternoon about 2 or 3 and see that you were at your desk and working. And he'd stroll through the office. You could count it like a clockwork every day. Anyway, he would come around and 2 or 3 o'clock, are you working? And if you had a trial, won a trial, like I told him one time, I got 50 years on this guy for some sort of murder. And he said, isn't the maximum life? He would never give you a compliment. He would say, wasn't the maximum on that life? Why didn't you get life? And I thought, well, 50 years was pretty good, Mr. Wade. He said, not good enough. And he was a very hard-nosed prosecutor, Mr. Wade. And he used to give us lectures, and he said things like, remember, we convict him on the front page. If it gets reversed by the Court of Appeals, it's on the back page. So just concentrate on winning the case. Don't worry about let the appellate section handle the details. So.
Henry Wade, who of course is a legend here in Dallas, he had a very unique style in the courtroom. He was laid back and almost country in his approach, and yet he was very shrewd and calculating. Can you talk a little bit about the way he approached a courtroom?
Yeah, Mr. Wade acted like an old country boy, but as I remember from my friend Tom Eunice, he was on the law review at Texas Law School and very smart and the top of his class. But he would put on this air like he was just an old country boy. He was always chewing on a cigar he wasn't smoking and spitting. And he would give this old country boy attitude, but he was smart as a whip and actually kind of brilliant in the law. He knew the law well and trial tactics. The rumor was, that when I was at the DA's office and afterwards, that he'd never lost a criminal jury trial. I don't know if that was true or not, or still true, but that's what they said, that he'd never lost a trial. And his style in the courtroom, the jury just loved him. He gave him the old country boy sayings and acted like an old country boy, but he wasn't. He was smart as a whip.
Tell me about Bill Alexander. What was his personality like?
Bill Alexander was tough as nails and rough. My interview with Henry Wade, once he decided to hire me and there was an opening and so forth, he said, you have to pass muster with the first assistant, Bill Alexander. Go talk with him. So I went to see Mr. Alexander. And said, Mr. Wade told me to come see you, see if you think I'm okay to sign on. And Bill says to me, he says, well, Troy, are you tough? I said, yes, sir. He says, when we catch these criminals, they've already got away with it 3 or 4 times. So when you get them done, you got to kick them. Can you do that? I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, you're hired.
So once you got in the door, it wasn't that hard to pass muster with these guys.
No, once you got in the door. But I think that advice was true if you didn't have a letter of recommendation. And Mr. Wade put great stock in how bad you wanted the job. And that was to show up every 3 weeks in the waiting room and ask Mr. Wade, is anybody left yet? Anybody getting ready to be fired? He'd say, no, come back next month. And that went on for about 6 months, I think, till I got a job.
Do you remember what some of your first cases were?
Yeah, I remember the first case I tried, and you start out in the county criminal misdemeanor courts. And the first case I tried, they don't give you any preparation. They just throw you in the courtroom. And in fact, we didn't get to even watch any trials. So the first week I'm there, I'm in county criminal court trying a pistol case, possession of a pistol, which is a misdemeanor. And I go to offer the gun in evidence, State's Exhibit 1, and offer an evidence. Defense objects, judge says sustained. And so then I asked the court reporter to mark it, entered into an evidence objection, sustained. Finally, that went on about 4 times, and the judge called me up to the bench. Said, Mr. Troy, you've got to show it to the defense attorney before it's admissible. So I had to go show it to him, then I got it in evidence. So that was my first trial.
Sort of a trial by fire, I guess.
Yeah, they just threw you in the courtroom. Wow. And you tried 2 or 3 a week. And usually you would just read the file as you starting because they're misdemeanors and not major offenses. So they wouldn't require a lot of preparation. And you could try a DWI just by reading the file. So the first trials were just throw you in there and let you learn as you. And then when you had time, you go watch other trials. And that's how you learn watching the other prosecutors.
On bigger cases, murders and such, would it be several assistant DAs working together?
Yeah, on major cases like murders, rapes, robberies, or any crime of violence, there would be at least 2 assistant district attorneys that had felony court experience. usually 8 to 10 years as the lead prosecutor, and then the second one would be like 5 years experience. And they did a lot of preparation on those cases, and a lot of work, briefed the law out, and were well prepared, and they were the most experienced attorneys. But yeah, you had to take a lot of preparation on major felonies, because if you messed one up, you got fired. If you weren't prepared, you got fired. So you had to make sure you were ready and you knew what you were doing.
Were most of the assistant DAs young men like you, or were some of them older than you?
Almost all of them were young men just out of law school. There were a few older ones that had done other things and had maybe been in the JAG or had been in private practice and came to work for the DA. But I'd say 80% of them were young men just out of law school. Mr. Wade liked to train him himself, he used to say. Train him in the Henry Wade style, which was be tough and don't worry about the rest of it. Just get a conviction and be prepared, and show up on time and be ready. He said, I don't want any announcements I'm not ready. So you better be prepared when you had a trial set.
So you had been with the DA's office for about a year or so when the president was assassinated.
Yeah, I'd been in the DA's office about a year and a half. Started in '62, and Kennedy was assassinated in '63. So I'd been there about a year to a year and a half when the assassination occurred.
That was Friday, November 22nd. Take me through your day. Tell me what you remember.
Okay, on that Friday, I was at the Dolphins Hotel, which is in the middle of Dallas on Main Street. And I was presiding over the Young Lawyers Association of Dallas. I was the president of the Young Lawyers. And we were having our monthly meeting. And we had maybe 30 or 40 young attorneys there. And we broke for when the president was coming down Main Street, which was right out in front of the Adolphus. We broke to go down and watch it. And we all went down, and I was on the front row of the street, no more than 10 or 12 feet from Kennedy and Jackie when they came by in the limousine. And I could see her pink hat and everything and see the president. I was about as close as I am to you. And they were letting people just off the curbs right out in the middle of the street, which I thought was kind of unsafe. And anyways, after they passed, we went back up to renew the Young Lawyers meeting. And we just started up the meeting and we're going to the next speaker when somebody came running in telling us the president had been shot down the end of the street. Well, we all ran, and of course I went back straight to the DA's office, which was down about 5 blocks down the street. At that time, we were on the top of the records building, and I can't remember if the air conditioning was broken or wasn't working or what, but all the windows were open in the records building in the DA's office. So everybody, all the assistant DAs and secretaries heard the shots because it's catty corner to the shooting. Mm-hmm. It's less than half a block, the records building. So when that happened, it was pandemonium in Dallas. It was just unbelievable. And at that time, there was no federal law against killing the president. There was only state laws. And there was, in fact, since then, of course, the Congress has changed that, and just about every federal official is covered now under federal law. But at that time, if you killed the president, there was no federal law. You had to be tried under state law. So we had to prepare to try Lee Harvey Oswald under Texas state murder law.
Was that something that you were aware of right away, or did someone have to sort of stop and think about it a minute and realize there's no federal law for murdering the president?
People had to stop and think about it and research it. Mm-hmm. Because we'd had 2 or 3 presidents assassinated in the history, and so everybody assumed there must be a federal law. But then they got the research and found out there was no federal law for murdering the president. And so it fell to state law. So,
you know how long that took for them to realize that this was a local homicide under the jurisdiction of the police department?
It only took them a few days because they had people, the biggest brains in Washington and Dallas, in the law books researching it, and to make sure they got it right, because you couldn't make a mistake. And I'd say within 24 or 48 hours they figured out that he was going to have to be tried under the Texas murder law statute. And so Mr. Wade then went into overdrive. He put all the assistant DAs on 3 8-hour shifts to start preparing the murder trial for Lee Harvey Oswald. And we worked 3 8-hour shifts getting ready for the murder trial, because it was going to be the trial of the century. And
all the assistant DAs in the office?
All of them worked different 8-hour shifts. As I recall, they had 3 8-hour shifts.
Wow.
getting ready for the trial. And of course, everybody was worried about making a mistake. And so we're preparing for Lee Harvey Oswald's trial. And then, of course, Jack Ruby assassinates Lee Harvey Oswald. So then we start preparing for Jack Ruby's trial. And that didn't require quite as much effort because there were so many witnesses and there was. So.
Quite a harrowing 4 days, though.
From
the shooting of the president to the shooting of Oswald.
It was very harrowing. And
well, I want to go back for a moment. You saw the president just a few moments before he was shot. Did he, in that brief glimpse you had of him, that up-close glimpse on Main Street, did he look the same as he appeared in Life magazine or on television?
He did. He looked he looked more handsome than in the pictures, and Jackie looked more beautiful in the pictures. When you're up close and personal, they look better to me than they do in the pictures or in newsreels.
We were talking earlier about the political atmosphere, and you mentioned how conservative the city was with the John Birch Society. Were you concerned when you knew Kennedy was coming to town, would be in a motorcade through downtown? Were you concerned that there might be some sort of demonstration?
Yes, the newspapers had talked about, the Dallas Morning News had run several articles about there might be demonstrations. And so I was concerned there was going to be demonstrations. And I remember when I was standing out there 10 or 12 feet from Jackie and the president, I thought, this is not safe letting people come off the sidewalks to the middle of the street. You know, they shouldn't do that. That's too close. But I can't remember ever recalling worrying about him being assassinated because it never crossed my mind that would happen. But in retrospect, I think it's very unsafe to have an open limousine like that with no top. Of course, they don't do that anymore. Now the president rides around in what's called the Beast. It's an armored vehicle that you couldn't penetrate with a RPG.
Was it difficult for you, having seen the president, finding out he was shot, and then immediately starting to work on the case against Oswald? Was it difficult to find time for yourself to have an emotional reaction to what was happening? Yes.
That weekend that Kennedy was killed on Friday, I stayed home with my wife all weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we cried for 3 days. We just couldn't stop crying over it. It was so emotional. It was because I was a personal backer of his and thought so much of him and thought so much of his potential that I remember my wife and I, we couldn't stop crying for 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and Monday I had to go back to work. So I had to quit crying, but it was very emotional to me.
I've seen a lot of news footage from that weekend showing Henry Wade at Dallas Police Headquarters, and do you have any sense as to how Wade was impacted emotionally? When you see him on TV, he's always so stoic and so serious. Any insight into how he responded to the president's death?
No insight to that. He was not a man that wore his emotions on his sleeve at all. He was very introspective, and he never showed emotion much at all, and he didn't show any in that. It was just, I've got a job to do and I'm going to do it right. But I didn't see any emotion on Mr. Wade about it. And I never could tell if he was a Kennedy backer or not. I know that with him everything was black and white. If you broke the law, you went to jail, you know. He didn't, you know, I remember when friends of his would get in trouble and would come to him for help, he'd say, I can't help you, go hire a good defense lawyer. I remember one time the president of the Dallas Bar Association got a DWI, and somebody came to him about that, and he said, I don't do any special favors for anybody. He said, you go hire a good defense lawyer. Here's a list of 5. You pick one of them.
Wow.
That was his attitude towards fixing any case. He wouldn't do it for anybody. In fact, his own brother, Henry Wade's brother, was an alcoholic, and he got a DWI, and they came to him, and he said, you treat him like anybody else. And that was his attitude on law and order.
Is that the secret to his staying power, considering how long he was DA?
That and politically he was very wise. He knew just who to be friends with, and his law and order stand was tough. I mean, it was the max for every violent crime, and don't cut any deals for anybody that does violence or robberies or assaults or anything. And the Dallas public loved that because the Dallas public in general was conservative. So law and order played well with conservative people. So Mr. Wade was so powerful after 10 or 15 years that nobody even run against him. I think he probably had 10 or 15 years where he had no opponent in either Democratic or Republican primary, because everybody knew they couldn't beat Henry Wade. He was so popular. That's why he was DA for 35 plus years.
Any idea how Wade would have handled it if Oswald had gone to trial? Had he lived, what Wade's strategy would have been?
Well, his strategy would have been straightforward. Present the evidence. They had the rifle. They had some forensic evidence, I understand. He would have presented all the forensic evidence, the witnesses, and there wouldn't have been any doubt in my mind. He would have got a Dallas jury to convict him of murder and give him the death penalty, just like he did Jack Ruby.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Ruby, well, that's another subject of the Jack Ruby trial. But
something I often get asked about, Ruby initially said that one of the reasons he shot Oswald was because he wanted to spare Jackie Kennedy the pain of having to maybe come back to Dallas to testify in a trial against Oswald. With that in mind, do you think there's any chance that Henry Wade would have called Jackie Kennedy to testify in a trial against Oswald?
I don't think there's any chance he would have done that, because he wouldn't have wanted to put that emotional burden on her, and he wouldn't have needed it with the evidence he had, so I don't think he would have called her.
Okay. Do you remember where you were when you found out that Ruby had shot Oswald?
No, I don't remember where I was when that happened. Just remember that the whole office had to shift from getting ready on one trial to getting ready on another one. And it was quite a switch, because it was such a shock to have both things happen so fast. Was it in 4 days? I forgot.
The president was shot on Friday and Oswald was shot Sunday, so it was very quickly. And then Kennedy and Oswald were both buried on Monday, which was a national day of mourning.
So it was like only 2 days between...
Yeah, about 48 hours between the two shootings.
I'd forgotten how close it was together.
Do you remember anything in particular you worked on with the Oswald case before it shifted to Jack Ruby?
No, I don't. We were just getting geared up, starting assignments of who was going to do what when Ruby killed him. So we hadn't gotten very far in trial preparation or strategy or anything. It's before Ruby killed him, so I can't.
Had you ever heard of Jack Ruby before this happened?
Yes, I'd heard of Jack Ruby. He was famous for having a strip joint across from the Baker Hotel down there, the Carousel Club. And a lot of assistant DAs and police and everybody frequented his club. So a lot of people knew him. He was kind of a cop hanger-oner. He loved the cops and he let them in free. And Jack Ruby ran the Carousel Club, and he was always there every night. And he was kind of a cop wannabe, as we call him. He hung around the police a lot, and they were kind of his friends. So I knew who he was.
Were you around him enough to be able to sort of describe his personality before the shooting?
Well, his personality, the profile of someone that would own a strip club. Loud talking, smoking cigars, drinking a lot, giving everybody free drinks, and flirting with the strippers and all that stuff. Jack Ruby did all that.
Did you did you and the rest of the DAs, did you approach the shooting of Oswald as if Ruby was a lone gunman with no other outside assistance, or did you approach it at first with the idea that maybe there was more to the story than just Ruby? Maybe he was involved with other individuals.
We approached it that he was the lone gunman and there was no one else involved, because he was such a cop wannabe and hanging around famous people, that my own theory was that he did it because he thought he was going to become famous. That was my theory from being in the trial, the Jack Ruby trial, and reading all the accounts, that he actually thought that the nation would think he was a hero for killing the presidential assassin. But he didn't understand that the American public and Americans in general don't believe in vigilante justice. But he was not thinking straight. He thought that he would be a national hero and never be tried, and he would save Jackie from having to testify and have the trial and all that. He thought he'd never be prosecuted, that they'd think he's more of a national hero than anything else.
Did you ever get the chance to talk to Ruby after the shooting was over?
No, I never talked to him personally.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw him in the courtroom during the trial.
What part of the prosecution case did you work on?
I worked on some of the witness preparation, and Mr. Wade was the first, what we call first chair, the lead prosecutor in the Jack Ruby trial. Bill Alexander was the second chair, but actually led the prosecution. Mr. Wade liked to leave all the small details to the other one. He would do the major thing, like talk to the jury in final arguments. And he had about 4 or 5 of us sitting kind of as assistant district attorneys behind the counsel table. And he was calling us to go do various things, get such witness, get a statement, so and so. He'd have us do that. The actual main preparation was done by Bill Alexander, who did the trial preparation. The Ruby trial was really kind of fascinating. The defense attorney was Melvin Belli from San Francisco, who was known as the king of torts in San Francisco and California. He was the #1 personal injury lawyer. What Melvin Belli didn't know was that expertise in personal injury has no relation to criminal. It's completely different. The strategy is different, the techniques are different, and he kind of made a fool of himself during the trial because he was trying personal injury techniques on a criminal trial. And to my knowledge, he'd never tried a major criminal case before, but he thought his being nationwide famous for personal injury would translate over. It would be the trial of the century for him. But one of the most interesting things about the trial was how Bill Alexander used to goad Mr. Belli. He would call him Mr. Belly, B-E-L-L-Y, instead of Belli. And Melvin Belli would get madder than hell. He says, not Belly, it's Belli. And Alexander would do that every other day, call him Mr. Belly. And he would get so mad, he asked Judge Joe Brown to make Mr. Alexander stop calling me Mr. Belly. And the judge wouldn't do it, so Bill Alexander would keep doing it every couple of days. And he would get red in the face and mad. And one of the damnedest things he did was he showed up in court with a briefcase made out of red velvet with a gold plate on it that said Dr. Melvin Belli. Which he wasn't a doctor, he was an attorney, but attorneys just technically are doctors. But
Belli was quite flamboyant. I've seen some of the suits he wore to the trial, Savile Row suits with, he had like a kind of a cape that he would wear too. Do you remember that?
I do. He made the worst impression on the jury. I mean, you could watch the jury if you're a criminal defense lawyer or a prosecutor, you've been around a couple of years, you can learn to watch juries and see how they relate to people. And it was clear after the first week of trial that the jury just did not like Mr. Belli at all. And his velvet briefcase and his dress and the way he talked was just turning them off. And we used to make jokes afterwards that the jury gave Ruby death because of his lawyer instead of what he did. And of course, he got the death penalty, and then on appeal it was reversed because they said that the venue should have been moved out of Dallas, too much publicity, to another city in Texas, which was a ridiculous theory because there was no city in Texas where the jury didn't know what went on. But while he was in jail waiting a retrial, he died of cancer. So Jack Ruby was never tried again, never officially convicted.
Ruby's first attorney was a local attorney named Tom Howard. Do you remember Tom?
Yeah, I know Tom Howard. Uh-huh.
And then Ruby's family is the one that brought in Melvin Belli. Do you think that the outcome would have been different had a local attorney such as Tom Howard tried the case?
I think I'm not sure it would have been different, and maybe he would have got life instead of death, because Tom Howard was a pretty skilled defense attorney, and he knows how to try criminal cases where Mr. Belli did not. I mean, this has been proven in my lifetime over several instances of criminal lawyers trying to do personal injury and vice versa. It's a whole different skill technique. Your strategy, the way you approach juries, the technique, everything is different. And one does not relate to the other. So Mr. Howard, being a long-time criminal defense attorney in Dallas, say 40-some years, I think would have done a much better job. Couldn't have gotten Jack Ruby off with all those witnesses. But maybe he could have found some reason for the jury to give him life instead of death. That was the best you could come out in that trial, because Dallas jurors didn't believe in vigilante justice either, so they wouldn't have approved of that at all.
What can you tell me about two key defense attorneys that worked with Belli, Joe Tonnahill and Phil Burleson?
Phil Burleson I knew personally, and he was a very skilled attorney, the most skilled of the three. He was a genius on the law books and also a good trial strategy lawyer. It's a rarity in criminal defense, prosecution, or defense to have a lawyer who's both good, what we call a book lawyer, and a trial technique lawyer. And Phil Burleson was both. He was of the top. He would have been one of the top 5 defense lawyers in Dallas at the time. But his brilliance on the law, he stood out above others.
Joe Tonnahill was from Jasper.
Yeah, Joe Tonnahill was from Jasper, and he was kind of a good old country boy lawyer like Henry Wade. And I didn't know him personally. In fact, his reputation I hadn't even heard of, but he was pretty famous in East Texas, wherever he's from, having done some good trials and good acquittals over there. So he had a reputation, but he was not known statewide like Phil Burleson was not known statewide, but he was known in Dallas as one of the top 5 lawyers.
It's been suggested that in his defense of Ruby, Melvin Belli was trying to put Dallas on trial. He was very critical of the community, the Dallas power structure.
Yeah, he was trying to put Dallas on trial as part of his strategy, which was a stupid thing to do when you have a Dallas jury. When you talk about wanting to make somebody mad at you, you're insulting the very jury that you're pitching that to. But that would be a trial technique that no experienced criminal defense lawyer would ever try, to insult the jury by saying that Dallas caused the death when it's obviously not true.
Belli's defense was that Ruby suffered from psychomotor epilepsy and sort of wasn't aware of his actions. How did you and Mr. Wade and Mr. Alexander treat this?
Well, first of all, we'd never heard of the defense at all. And we researched it out and couldn't find any case law on it, couldn't find any case where it was ever used, couldn't find any case where it was ever successful, and wondered why Mr. Belli came up with that theory, because first of all, the jury couldn't even understand it. He brought in all these experts testifying about it, but none of them made any dent with the jury, because the theory was just way out in left field, and nobody believed it, and it was hard to understand. In fact, I was through the whole trial, I never did understand the theory, and the experts that talked about it, had never been heard of before, and never been used before, as far as I know, in any criminal trial. So that was another one of Mr. Belli's deficiencies. Comes up with a defense that's never been used. I mean, there was only one thing they could have done. Maybe plead guilty and go for mercy with the jury and put on evidence that he had no criminal record and he saved Jackie Kennedy having to testify and all that. His intentions were good. Maybe he would have got a life sentence, not the death penalty.
Do you think it was a mistake for Belli not to put Ruby on the stand?
No, I don't think it's a mistake. The majority opinion, I've been practicing law now for 50 years. I just got my certificate in the Dallas Bar for 50 years. And the general feeling among all criminal defense lawyers is 90% of the time you don't put your client on the stand. He usually can only mess up the case. He very rarely can convince her. There are 10% of the cases where you have to put them on in order to prove certain defenses, like self-defense. Cannot be proved unless the defendant testifies. But in that case, with TV cameras watching him shoot him and all those witnesses, it would have been no benefit to put Jack Ruby on the stand. And you can't argue I didn't do it or anything like that. It's a waste of time. And still today, the same theory applies. We don't put the defendant on the stand 90% of the time, because all they can do is make things worse, get tripped up and get the jury not to like them. And it's not a good technique at all.
Sitting there every day and observing the trial in action, do you remember anything about Jack Ruby's mannerisms, his body language?
He was very respectful to the court. His demeanor was good the whole trial. He never did anything to upset the trial, never did anything to upset the judge. He sat there and did his part, was to sit there and keep quiet. I can't remember, most defense lawyers give the defendant a yellow pad and a pen and tell them to make notes. It makes them look more interesting and makes a better impression on the jury. He probably did that.
Did he ever show any emotion?
I never saw him show any emotion, not even when the verdict came in. Now, when the verdict came in, Judge Joe Brown let all the national network TV cameras come in the courtroom, and all the networks were in there, and they broadcast the jury verdict, and which was a great benefit to me because all my relatives in Boston, Massachusetts called me up and said they saw me on TV.
It was quite a madhouse, though, when the verdict was announced. It looks like people are climbing on the furniture, standing on chairs. Do you remember that scene?
I can't remember the detail of people standing on chairs. I just remember it was sensational because I don't think anybody expected death. They expected a life sentence, or maybe 40 or 50 years. And the death sentence was not something I thought was going to happen, or most people did. And I think even the press thought he'd probably get life or 50 years because he'd kind of done the country a favor by killing the assassin. But it was kind of a sensational verdict, and that's why people in the courtroom was so full of press and all these TV cameras lined in the back that it was a kind of a madhouse in there.
There was quite a lot of security. I've seen footage of sheriff's deputies doing pat-downs and things like that. Had you ever seen security like this for a trial?
I'd never seen so much security in my life as they had in this trial. Of course, they were worried about something else happening. After Jack Ruby getting that close to Lee Harvey Oswald, they weren't taking any chances on anything. So they had more security than I'd ever seen before.
And there was a jailbreak, a Dallas County jailbreak. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that happened during the trial or something, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah, I remember a jailbreak. It didn't have anything to do with the trial, but it was kind of sensational. But Jack Ruby could have got off with a lesser sentence if he'd had a better attorney. Mr. Belli went back to California and kind of was in shame, I think, because he did such a bad job. I mean, the juror interviews afterwards, they just admitted they hated Mr. Belli. They just did not like him at all. And when the jury hates a defense lawyer, you always lose.
After the trial was over, did you start work on the appeal, or did you go on to other cases?
No, I went on to other cases. We had a separate appellate section, which are what we call our book lawyers. Book lawyers usually make terrible trial lawyers. Trial lawyers usually make terrible book lawyers.
Okay.
So in criminal defense, we separate them. And so the appellate section handled all that.
Was this the highest profile case you were ever involved in?
It was the highest profile case I've ever involved in whereby it was in the media that much. I was involved personally in one myself, which made the front page of the morning news, if you want me to tell you about that.
Sure, yeah, I'd be interested.
I believe it was 1997. I had a defendant I was representing who was charged with capital murder, which could carry the death penalty. And in investigating the case, I found out that what happened was 4 or 5 carloads of black young men went over to this apartment house to visit friends. And in the parking lot, they saw an opposite gang member. Well, my defendant was in one of the 5 cars, but he didn't even come to the parking lot. He went up to visit this girl in her apartment. Well, they got in a fight in the parking lot, and they shot this fellow gang member and killed him. And the police, which Dallas police are a lot more efficient now, they charged everybody in all the 5 cars with capital murder, even the ones that weren't at the scene. There was 4 or 5 guys up at this apartment. Well, it didn't take a whole lot of persuasion after getting all the witness statements and all, to go to the DA's office and say, you know, you just don't have a capital murder on this guy. He's up here at this apartment visiting this girl, and the shooting's down here. He doesn't even know the guy. So they dismissed the capital murder, and he walked out of jail after about 6 months. They were going for the death penalty on everybody. Well, about a year to 12 months later, I get a call from Colorado. This same defendant. He said, I'm in jail in Colorado. I said, what for? He said, capital murder. I said, it can't be capital murder. It must be a computer mistake. They forgot to put the dismissal on the National Crime Information Computer System. He says, no, it's someone else. This is just a year and 4 months later. And I said, well, what is it about? They said that myself and a friend and an associate killed a Borden truck dairyman over in South Dallas, jumped on the running board of his truck and shot him in the head and killed him. So they extradited him to Texas. This is the same guy that was in jail a year and a half before for capital murder. Now he's charged with capital murder over the death penalty again. So fortunately for him, his mother worked at Texas Instruments and could go to the credit union and hire competent defense attorneys. So first thing I did was hire this investigator who came down here from the Bronx. He now runs the biggest bond company in Dallas. And anyway, he's just a typical Bronx kid, muscled up and everything. And I hired him as an investigator. The first day out on the scene of the murder trial place, he finds 2 witnesses that saw the shooting, just being out on the street. And he interviews them, takes statements from them, and they say they know the defendant, and he wasn't one of the 2. They had 2 young black men jump on the running board of the Borden delivery truck, one on each side. One of the 2 shot him in the head and took the cash box. He found 2 witnesses that said they knew my client, and he was not one of the 2. So he took those statements. He goes back out a few days later and interviewing more witnesses in this area, and they said, we know who it was. It was one of the 2 guys was a guy named X. So he starts looking for him, finds out he's in juvenile prison down in South Texas for committing another armed robbery. So I told my investigator, I said, well, we got nothing to lose. You get down there and talk to him and see if he'll talk to you. Well, believe it or not, he talked to my investigator and said, yes, I was involved in the Borden robbery. I was the guy on the other side of the truck that didn't shoot him. So we got a statement from him saying he was involved in the Borden robbery. Oh, in the meantime, they had charged, besides my client, they had charged this other black male who my client didn't know. So what I did was, this other kid was indigent. So I hired a polygraph expert to go to the jail and take a lie detector test to both of them. And both of them passed the test that they didn't kill the guard, and they don't know each other. Never knew each other. So I got 2 polygraphs and a witness statement, and I got 2 witness statements from the scene saying he wasn't even there. So then I go to the chief prosecutor of the DA's office and lay it on his desk. Say, here it is. Here's the polygraph test. They don't know each other. They didn't do it. Here's the guy that said he was a participant but didn't shoot him. And of course, the district attorney's office does not believe newly discovered evidence. Their evidence was a prostitute drug addict who was on the street and identified these 2 as the shooters. And she did that because she got the $10,000 from Shep's Dairy that they offered. And so anyway, this first assistant DA, who was a very credible guy, he almost won DA here. His name was Toby Shook. He told me, Mark, you got a lot of evidence here, but we'll have to start scratch one and go over. First thing, we're going to the juvenile prison to see if this guy's lying or anybody intimidated him. So he takes an investigator and go down to the prison and interview the guy, and he said, no, I gave a statement voluntarily, and I was there, but I didn't do the shooting. And then they interview the other guy, don't know the other defendant. So he spends about 3 months reinvestigating the case. He calls me up, he says, you're right, your guy's innocent. So he did a dismissal of capital murder case on both guys. Anyway, it made the front page of the Dallas Morning News in 1997 because it's the only case that they know of in Texas history where the same defendant was cleared of 2 capital murders in 18 months.
Wow.
And so that was my most famous case ever.
Is it better to be on the defense team as opposed to the prosecution team?
Well, it's actually more fun to be a prosecutor because you're the guy we call with the white hat, and you're always supposed to be on the right side. Most of the time, the defendant is guilty, and very few in it. So you feel better, and people look on you better if you're a prosecutor than a defense lawyer. But the prosecution has a limited time you can be there because of the fact that they can't pay real well, and you couldn't put a kid through college or support yourself very well on their salary. So as far as doing the right thing all the time and being the good guy, being the prosecutor is it. Being a defense lawyer, sometimes you have to defend some people you don't particularly like, and the majority of them are not innocent. So that's the difference.
How long were you with the DA's office?
I was there about 3 years, and then at that time, Mr. Wade had just been elected DA, or hadn't been in for many years. He didn't have any pull with the county commissioners yet, who doled out all the money, as you probably know. And so he couldn't get our salaries up to a living wage. Matter of fact, he let us practice on the side when we weren't in trial. We could go up the street to a law firm and borrow an office and do simple stuff like collections and waiver divorces and car wrecks. We weren't in trial because the salary was so low you couldn't make a living on it. I think it was something like $600 a month. So we all did that.
In the last 50 years since the Kennedy assassination, have you given thought to whether Oswald acted alone or whether you think there may have been a conspiracy? What are your thoughts today?
Yeah, I've read all the articles. I read about 3 newspapers a day. I used to read 5 a day, and I used to read all the magazines till they came out of print. And I'm kind of a news junkie, and I've read all the conspiracy theories and all. And I don't think there's any credible evidence that there was a conspiracy. I think Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone assassin. I just think it was a lucky shot he got off with that car moving, having one shot from that Italian rifle from that perch. Just bad luck for Kennedy that day because 90% of the time, what I've read, you'd miss that shot. He was of course, he was trained in the Army as a sniper. He had sniper training. But I don't think there's any credible evidence that there was a conspiracy. Of course, it is always suspicious that he went to Russia and all that. But we've since the fall of the Soviet Union, we've gotten into a lot of the Soviet archives. We can't find anything in the KGB that they had anything to do with Lee Harvey Oswald.
One person I didn't ask you about was Judge Joe B. Brown. What can you tell me about Judge Brown?
Judge Joe B. Brown was a very stern judge, but very fair. He ran a tight court and required everybody to be polite to each other, and would run a. There was some judge on TV, although I guess there was a judge in the O.J. Simpson trial who kind of let everybody run amok. Well, Joe Brown was not that kind of judge. He was very stern but fair to everybody. But you followed the rules and you didn't get out of hand. You didn't make what we call, instead of objections, they're called legal arguments. You get up and make a legal argument instead of an objection. He wouldn't allow that.
Were you in his courtroom a lot?
I was in his courtroom a good bit. At that time, we only had 2 felony judges, and I was in one of the felony courts most of the time with a judge named Henry something or other. Can't remember his name, but Joe Brown was the other judge. But most of my cases were in the other felony court.
I understand that Judge Brown's courtroom was too small to accommodate the Ruby trial, so they had to move it to the Frank Wilson courtroom. Does that ring any bells?
That's right. They moved it to the biggest courtroom we had at the time. It's kind of a ceremonial courtroom now. Now when they build new criminal courts building, they Like one in Houston, they built a ceremonial courtroom for large trials. The others are all kind of standard size, not too big. It was moved to the largest courtroom we had, and it was done in old style, old wood and marble and everything. You know, probably built in the 30s.
Yeah, I've been over there. I mean, it's used for storage today, but it's still a beautiful space. You can tell it was quite grand in its day.
Yeah, those old courtrooms had a lot of grandeur to them. They had a lot of marble and wood. Yeah, the acoustics was terrible, but otherwise they were very, very ornate.
Well, as we come to the end of these conversations, if there's anything I haven't asked you, any other stories or memories from those days that you'd like to share with us, it's open for you.
No, that covers most everything I can think of. I never will forget the 3 days at home crying, though, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I just couldn't stop crying. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas, thinking it was just going to ruin Dallas, and feeling sorry for Jackie Kennedy. And watching those TV images of the kids, that's the most striking memory, is spending all weekend just crying because it was so sad. And he had such potential. And I'm a big historian buff. I read a lot of history. And I think the way he handled the Cuban Missile Crisis was just brilliant. It kept us out of a Third World War. He went against the generals and the admirals that wanted to bomb Cuba. He said no. He overruled the generals and the admirals, and that probably saved us from World War III. So that was his finest hour. He saved us from Armageddon.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate you sharing your story with us for this project.
Glad to do it.